Before we begin, feel free to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps bring more soothing stories your way. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Elon Musk leaned back in his ergonomic chair, the glow of his monitors reflecting off his face as late-night ideas swirled through his mind. The billionaire was no stranger to tackling complex problems, colonizing Mars, revolutionizing transportation, building artificial intelligence. But this time, his focus had shifted. For weeks, he'd been haunted by headlines about homelessness, racial inequality, and the widening wealth gap in America. "Are we doing enough?" he had asked his team during a recent meeting. They'd assured him that Tesla's charitable donations and his foundation's initiatives were making a difference. But Elon wasn't convinced. Numbers on a spreadsheet didn't translate to lives changed. He needed to see the problem up close. That's when the idea struck him. What if he stepped out of his bubble and experienced life from the perspective of the people his wealth purported to help? The next morning, Elon reached out to a Hollywood makeup artist who had worked on high-profile films. He explained his plan. He wanted to become unrecognizable, blending seamlessly into the streets. The artist, initially skeptical, agreed after some cajoling and the promise of an astronomical fee. The transformation took hours. Layers of makeup and prosthetics turned Elon's face weathered and gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes and scruffy facial hair. A wig of thinning, greasy hair completed the disguise. His typical sharp, tailored suits were swapped for tattered clothing that reeked of neglect. A patched jacket, baggy jeans with frayed hems, and mismatched sneakers. For Elon, the physical change was shocking. Staring into the mirror, he barely recognized himself. Gone was the confident entrepreneur who graced magazine covers. In his place stood a man society might avoid on the street. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady but tinged with apprehension. He packed a small, torn backpack with minimal supplies, a water bottle, a few granola bars, and a blanket. For the first time in years, he left his mansion without his phone, wallet, or even his watch. He felt naked without the trappings of wealth and power. Elon decided to begin his experiment outside a high-profile charity gala in downtown Los Angeles. The event, hosted by a well-known organization, promised to raise millions for homeless programs. The irony wasn't lost on him. Attendees in designer clothing would sip champagne while discussing the plight of the less fortunate. As he arrived at the venue, the stark contrast hit him immediately. The gala's entrance shimmered with lights and elegance. A red carpet stretched toward the grand doors, where photographers eagerly snapped pictures of Hollywood stars and tech moguls arriving in sleek electric cars. But on the fringes, reality painted a very different picture. A handful of homeless individuals lingered nearby, some holding signs, others curled up on the sidewalk. They were ignored by the glamorous crowd, as if they were part of the city's backdrop. Elon found an empty spot on the curb, carefully sitting down and clutching his own sign. It read in blocky, uneven handwriting, "Hungry, homeless, anything helps." As the minutes turned to hours, the reactions were as varied as they were disheartening. Some people pretended not to see him, averting their eyes as they walked by. Others glanced briefly before quickening their pace. A few tossed spare change into the tin can by his side without breaking stride. Elon noted how some people appeared uncomfortable, their body language stiff, as if proximity to him might somehow tarnish their own polished image. He wasn't sure what he expected, but the apathy stung more than he anticipated. The moment that truly rattled him came when a young child, no older than 8, tugged at his mother's hand and pointed toward Elon. "Mommy, why is that man sitting there?" the child asked innocently. The mother quickly ushered her child away, her voice a hurried whisper. "Don't stare, sweetie. Just keep walking." Elon watched them disappear into the crowd, his chest tightening. For the first time in decades, he felt invisible. Hours passed and the temperature dropped. Elon pulled his jacket tighter around him, but it offered little comfort. His stomach growled, and the granola bars in his backpack suddenly seemed insufficient for the days ahead. As he sat there, head bowed, he wondered if this experiment had been a mistake. He had entered this world voluntarily, but for so many others there was no escape. And then, just as he was losing hope in the human connections he sought, a voice broke through the haze of despair. "You eaten yet?" Elon looked up, startled. A young black man knelt before him, his expression a mix of concern and determination. His clothes were clean but modest, far from the designer labels of the gala attendees. Elon shook his head, unsure of what to say. The man reached into his backpack and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in foil. "Here," he said, handing it over. "It's not much, but you shouldn't go hungry tonight." Elon accepted the sandwich, mumbling a quiet thank you. As the man stood to leave, he added, "Take care of yourself, brother." For the first time that night, Elon felt seen, not as a homeless man, not as a billionaire in disguise, but as a person. The man's kindness stayed with him long after the gala lights dimmed, sparking questions Elon wasn't yet ready to answer. Why had it taken an experiment for him to confront this reality? And how could he use his privilege to truly make a difference? The charity gala was a masterpiece of modern excess, disguised as altruism. High-end cars hummed up to the valet, their doors swinging open to reveal celebrities draped in haute couture. Jewel-studded necklaces sparkled in the flash of paparazzi cameras, and murmurs of admiration rippled through the gathered crowd as the elite paraded toward the red carpet. Inside the venue, the decor was a spectacle of opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast shimmering light across tables, adorned with towering floral arrangements and place settings of polished silver and gold. A live string quartet played softly in the background, their music providing a delicate soundtrack to the champagne-fueled conversations of the attendees. But just outside, where Elon Musk sat hunched on the curb, the mood was starkly different. His cardboard sign, now slightly smudged, rested at his feet, and his eyes flicked between the gala's grandeur and the indifferent faces of those who passed him. The red carpet wasn't just a few feet away, it might as well have been a different universe. People continued to walk by him, each interaction illuminating the gap between perception and reality. A well-dressed man glanced in Elon's direction, hesitated for a moment, and then hurried on without a word. A pair of women dressed in identical sequined gowns whispered to each other as they passed, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disdain. "Do you think he's dangerous?" one of them murmured, loud enough for Elon to hear. "He's just part of the scenery," the other replied with a dismissive shrug. Elon's hands tightened around his knees. Each encounter felt like a new blow, driving home a truth he hadn't fully grasped before. People didn't just ignore the homeless. They actively dehumanized them. Then a man in a tailored tuxedo paused in front of Elon, reaching into his pocket. For a fleeting moment, Elon felt a surge of hope. The man knelt down slightly, dropping a crisp $20 bill into the tin can at Elon's feet. "There you go, buddy," the man said with a faint smile before straightening up and striding into the gala. Elon stared at the bill, its corners fluttering in the evening breeze. It wasn't the money that bothered him. He had more wealth than he could ever spend in a lifetime. It was the hollow nature of the gesture, a transaction devoid of connection or acknowledgement. To the man, Elon hadn't been a person. He had been a problem solved with a $20 bill. A sudden commotion near the entrance drew his attention. Cameras flashed wildly as a famous actress stepped out of a black limousine. Her sequined gown shimmered like liquid gold under the lights, and the crowd erupted in applause. She paused for a moment, waving elegantly before making her way toward the gala doors. As she passed Elon, she glanced down at him briefly, her painted lips curving into a pitying smile. Then, without breaking stride, she called over her shoulder, "Someone should really do something about the homeless problem." Elon felt a bitter laugh rise in his throat. Someone should do something. It was a phrase he'd heard countless times, often uttered by people like her, people who had the resources but lacked the willingness to act. Just as Elon was beginning to lose hope in his experiment, he noticed someone approaching from the edge of the crowd. Unlike the gala's attendees, this man was dressed simply in a button-down shirt and jeans. He carried a worn backpack slung over one shoulder, his steps purposeful as he navigated through the throng of onlookers. The man stopped in front of Elon and crouched down, his face level with Elon's. His skin was dark, his hair neatly trimmed, and his eyes held a quiet intensity that seemed to pierce through the layers of disguise. "You eaten yet?" the man asked, his voice steady and warm. Elon blinked, caught off guard by the question. He shook his head, unsure of how to respond. The man reached into his backpack and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in foil. "Here," he said, handing it over. "It's not much, but it'll fill you up." Elon took the sandwich, his hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," he muttered, his voice barely audible. The man smiled, a gesture of genuine kindness that stood in stark contrast to the performative acts of charity Elon had witnessed all evening. "No problem," the man said as he stood. "You hang in there, brother." As he walked away, Elon watched him disappear into the crowd. For the first time that night, he felt something other than frustration or despair. He felt a flicker of hope, not just for himself, but for humanity. Yet the encounter also raised a troubling question. Why had this man, dressed in modest clothes and clearly out of place among the gala's glittering attendees, been the only one to treat Elon with dignity? The answer, Elon suspected, lay not just in individual kindness, but in the deeper societal structures that shaped how people viewed one another. And as he sat there, clutching the sandwich in his hands, he resolved to dig deeper into those structures, no matter how uncomfortable the truth might be. Inside the grand ballroom, the charity gala unfolded like a choreographed spectacle. The tables were perfectly arranged, their pristine white linens offset by centerpieces of fresh orchids and cascading candles. Waitstaff glided between the guests, balancing trays of hors d'oeuvres that looked more like miniature works of art than food. A large banner hung above the stage, emblazoned with the evening's theme, "Building Bridges, Ending Homelessness Together." Elon, having slipped closer to the entrance unnoticed, watched the proceedings through the glass doors. The juxtaposition of luxury and the cause it purported to support struck him like a punch to the gut. He had anticipated a degree of dissonance, but seeing it so vividly unsettled him. Inside, an auctioneer in a tailored suit stood at the podium, rallying the room to bid on an array of high-ticket items. "A week-long stay at a private villa in Bali, starting at $50,000, the man called, his voice enthusiastic and bright. Hands shot up around the room, their owners grinning as the bids climbed higher. Elon couldn't help but wonder, how much of this money would actually reach the people who needed it most? In a corner of the ballroom, Darius, the young man who had given Elon a sandwich, moved quietly among the crowd. Unlike the other attendees, he wasn't dressed to impress. His plain button-down shirt and jeans stood out amid the sea of gowns and tuxedos. Darius was a social worker and a volunteer with the hosting organization. His role that evening wasn't to dine or mingle, but to ensure that the event's proceeds would be directed toward the charity's grassroots programs, many of which served communities disproportionately affected by homelessness. Black and brown neighborhoods that rarely saw the spotlight. As Darius tried to speak with donors, he noticed the subtle shifts in their body language. Some nodded politely but quickly changed the subject. Others offered perfunctory smiles before moving on to more important conversations. "Excuse me," he said to a woman wearing an emerald green gown. "I'd love to share how we're using donations to address housing inequities in South LA. "That's wonderful," she interrupted, her tone dismissive. "But I need to speak with Mr. Haverford about the auction." She swept past him without a backward glance. Darius sighed. He'd grown used to moments like this, where his passion for the cause was met with polite indifference. But tonight, it felt heavier. The gala, for all its grandeur, seemed more focused on photo ops than on real change. Outside, Elon continued to observe, his position on the curb giving him a unique vantage point. He noticed how some of the attendees avoided looking at the homeless individuals lingering near the venue, as if acknowledging them might tarnish the evening's glamour. A woman in a sleek black dress paused near the entrance, her gaze sweeping over the street. She spotted a man slumped against a wall, his belongings piled in a tattered shopping cart. Her lips pursed in discomfort, and she quickly turned to rejoin the safety of the gala. The hypocrisy of it all began to churn in Elon's stomach. These people, with their wealth and influence, had the means to effect real change. Yet for many, their charity seemed more like a performance than a commitment. Inside, the gala's keynote speaker took the stage. A prominent real estate developer known for his philanthropy, he launched into a polished speech about the importance of giving back. His words were met with enthusiastic applause, but Darius, standing at the back of the room, couldn't help but feel a pang of frustration. The developer's company had a history of lobbying against affordable housing initiatives, a fact that most of the audience seemed blissfully unaware of, or chose to ignore. As the applause faded, the speaker's voice rose again. "Homelessness is a complex issue, but together we can make a difference. Let's build a brighter future for everyone. Darius clenched his jaw. He knew that the systems perpetuating homelessness, predatory housing policies, low wages, inadequate health care, were anything but vague, complex issues. They were tangible, deeply entrenched injustices that disproportionately affected marginalized communities. Back on the curb, Elon's observations were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. A young woman in a shimmering silver dress stopped a few feet away, hesitating as she glanced at him. After a moment, she bent down and placed a folded $20 bill in his tin can. "Good luck," she said softly, her voice tinged with pity. Elon managed a faint nod of thanks, but the gesture felt hollow. He didn't need luck. He needed answers. As the woman walked away, Elon's thoughts turned to the man who had given him the sandwich. Darius, he realized, was the only person he'd encountered that night who treated him with genuine humanity. Curiosity tugged at him, and he resolved to find Darius inside the gala. Rising slowly, he brushed the dirt from his hands and adjusted his jacket. He slipped into the venue through a side door, his presence masked by the commotion of the evening. Once inside, Elon's senses were overwhelmed by the sights and sounds of the gala. The chandeliers glittered like stars, and the hum of conversation filled the air. He scanned the room, his eyes searching for the man who had shown him kindness. When he finally spotted Darius, the young man was speaking passionately with a small group near the back of the room. Elon moved closer, lingering just within earshot. "It's not just about shelters or handouts," Darius was saying. "We need systemic changes, affordable housing, better healthcare access, living wages. Otherwise, we're just putting a Band-Aid on the problem." The group listened politely, but their interest seemed superficial. One woman nodded before glancing at her watch. Another man muttered something about needing to check on the auction. Elon's heart sank. Darius was fighting to be heard in a room that wasn't ready to listen. As the group dispersed, Darius sighed and turned toward the refreshments table. Elon hesitated, debating whether to approach him. For now, he stayed in the shadows, watching and listening, determined to understand the world from a perspective he'd never truly seen before. The morning sun pierced through the thin veil of smog hanging over Skid Row, painting the streets in muted shades of golden gray. Elon Musk sat on the cracked sidewalk, his back against a graffiti-covered wall. The sounds of the city stirred around him. Cars honking in the distance, the rhythmic clatter of shopping carts pushed by others in the encampment, and the occasional shout from someone in a heated exchange. It was his second day living as a homeless man, and already the veneer of his experiment was wearing thin. Sleep had been elusive, interrupted by the cold concrete beneath him and the unease of his surroundings. His stomach growled incessantly, and the sandwich Darius had given him the previous night was a distant memory. Elon watched as a young black woman, no older than 25, methodically organized the contents of a duffel bag next to her makeshift shelter. A tarp stretched over 2 crates. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic, as she folded a tattered blanket and tucked it away. Despite her calm demeanor, Elon couldn't ignore the exhaustion etched into her face. She caught him staring and raised an eyebrow. "What you looking at, old man?" she asked, her tone sharp but not unkind. "Nothing," he replied quickly, averting his gaze. She softened, sensing his unease. "First time out here?" Elon hesitated before nodding. "Yeah," she said with a humorless laugh. "You'll get used to it, or you won't. Either way, welcome to the bottom." As the day wore on, Elon began to notice patterns he hadn't expected. The demographics of Skid Row were stark. The overwhelming majority of the people around him were black and brown. While homelessness was a universal issue, it was clear that it didn't impact all groups equally. He also noticed how people walking by treated those in the encampment differently based on appearance. A middle-aged white man in tattered clothes received nods of acknowledgement and occasional offers of assistance. A black man in a similar state, however, was met with suspicion. People clutched their belongings tighter or crossed the street to avoid him entirely. Elon experienced this disparity firsthand when he decided to panhandle on a busy corner. Standing next to him was a Latino teenager who introduced himself as Carlos. "Been out here long?" Carlos asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. "Just a couple of days," Elon replied. Carlos smirked. "You look new. People can tell, you know. They see it in how you hold yourself." As the morning passed, the difference in how people treated them became painfully obvious. A woman dropped a few coins into Elon's cup, offering him a tight smile. Moments later, she passed Carlos without so much as a glance. "Don't take it personally," Carlos said, shrugging. "Some folks think I'm going to rob them or something. It's just how it is." Elon's chest tightened. For all his wealth and intelligence, he had never truly considered the depth of racial bias woven into the fabric of society. Later that afternoon, Elon returned to the makeshift shelter he had claimed the night before. His mind swirled with questions. How did people endure this day after day? Why were certain communities disproportionately affected? And why had it taken him so long to see it? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of heavy boots on pavement. He looked up to see two police officers making their way through the encampment. Their faces were set in hard lines, their hands resting on their belts. "Let's go," one of them barked, gesturing at a group of people sitting near a fire barrel. "This area is getting cleared out. Pack your stuff and move along." Elon watched as the officers began dismantling tents and tossing belongings into a waiting garbage truck. The people protested, their voices rising in desperation, but the officers were unmoved. "Where are we supposed to go?" a man shouted, his voice cracking with frustration. "Not our problem," one officer replied coldly. Elon's stomach churned. He had read about such sweeps before, but seeing it in person was a different matter entirely. The people here weren't just losing their belongings, they were losing their dignity. A few feet away, the young black woman from earlier stood with her duffel bag in hand, her expression stoic. When one of the officers approached her, she raised her chin defiantly. "I'm moving," she said before he could speak. "You don't have to touch my stuff." The officer hesitated, then nodded curtly. As the sweep continued, Elon felt a surge of anger and helplessness. He wanted to speak up, to challenge the injustice unfolding before him, but he knew it wasn't his place. Not now, not here. That evening, Elon found himself sitting beside Carlos, who was repairing a torn piece of tarp with duct tape. "Is it always like this?" Elon asked, his voice low. Carlos glanced at him. "You mean the sweeps?" "Yeah, pretty much. They say it's for sanitation or safety, but really they just don't want us here, especially when there's tourists around." Elon frowned. "But where do people go?" Carlos shrugged. "Nowhere. They just push us around. Doesn't matter if you're old, young, black, white. Though," he added with a wry smile, "it's definitely worse if you're not white." Elon fell silent, his mind racing. He had spent his life solving problems, building rockets, creating sustainable energy solutions, but this felt insurmountable. It wasn't just about resources. It was about the attitudes and systems that perpetuated the cycle of poverty and displacement. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in shadows, Elon sat alone with his thoughts. The experiment had been meant to open his eyes, but it was doing more than that. It was forcing him to confront his own complicity in a system that allowed such inequality to persist. He didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was clear. If he wanted to make a difference, he would need to start by listening to the people who live this reality every day. The following evening, Elon found himself in a small, overcrowded shelter tucked into a forgotten corner of downtown Los Angeles. The shelter, a converted church with peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights, offered one of the few safe havens for those with nowhere else to turn. The air inside was thick with the scent of disinfectant and damp clothing. Thin mattresses lined the floor, each space occupied by someone seeking refuge from the unforgiving streets. Conversations buzzed in hushed tones as people shared stories of survival, hope, and despair. Elon sat cross-legged on the floor, watching as Darius moved through the room with practiced ease, distributing blankets and small meals to those who had managed to find a spot for the night. His movements were deliberate and unhurried, his presence a calming force amid the chaos. Elon had been debating his next move all day, and now sitting in the shelter, he felt a surge of resolve. He waited until Darius had finished his tasks, then approached him, nerves knotting in his stomach. "Darius," he began cautiously, "I need to tell you something." Darius glanced at him, his expression curious but guarded. "What's up?" Elon hesitated before pulling off his wig, revealing the neatly trimmed hair beneath. He wiped his face with a damp cloth, removing the layers of makeup that had disguised his features. Darius blinked, his mouth falling open slightly. "Wait a minute. Are you—" "Yes," Elon said, his voice soft but firm. "I'm Elon Musk." For a moment, Darius simply stared, his disbelief giving way to a mixture of confusion and frustration. "You're kidding me, right? What are you doing here?" "I wanted to understand," Elon explained. "I've spent my life building companies, creating technology, and chasing the future, but I realized I had no idea what it's really like for people on the margins. So I decided to live it myself." Darius folded his arms across his chest, his gaze skeptical. "And what? You think playing dress-up as a homeless man for a few days is going to change anything?" Elon flinched at the bluntness of the question but nodded. "It's not enough, I know that now, but I needed to see it firsthand to truly understand the scope of the problem. And I want to do more. Real, systemic change. But I need help. Your help." Darius stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed and gestured for Elon to follow him. They sat together in a quiet corner of the shelter, the low hum of conversation fading into the background. Darius leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "You want to understand?" he asked, his voice steady but intense. "Then listen, because this isn't just about being poor or not having a place to sleep. It's about a system designed to keep people like me, people like us, at the bottom." Elon nodded, leaning in as Darius continued. "You know what's crazy? Black people make up about 13% of the population, but we're almost 40% of the homeless population. Why? Because the system's rigged. Generational poverty, redlining, discriminatory lending practices. They've all made it damn near impossible for us to get ahead." He paused, his eyes searching Elon's face. "And don't even get me started on how the criminal justice system plays into this. You get a record, even for something small, and suddenly you can't get a job, can't get housing. It's a cycle. And guess who's most likely to get caught up in it? Black and brown folks." Elon felt a lump form in his throat. He had read statistics about racial disparities before, but hearing them laid out so plainly and so personally was something else entirely. "I've seen it every day out here," Darius said. "The cops treat us like trash, the shelters are overcrowded, and even the programs that are supposed to help us barely scratch the surface. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound." Elon's mind raced as Darius spoke. For years, he had focused on solving global problems, climate change, transportation, space exploration. But this issue, so deeply rooted in systemic inequality, felt even more daunting. "What can I do?" Elon asked finally. "I have resources, influence, but I don't know where to start." Darius leaned back, his gaze softening slightly. "Start by listening to the people who live this every day. Fund grassroots organizations, the ones working in the trenches. Push for policies that actually address the root causes: affordable housing, livable wages, criminal justice reform. And don't just throw money at the problem. Use your platform to amplify the voices that are already fighting this fight." Elon nodded, his determination solidifying. "You're right. I've spent too much time looking at problems from the top down. It's time to work from the ground up." As the night wore on, the two men continued to talk, their conversation ranging from policy solutions to the personal stories that shaped their perspectives. Elon listened intently, scribbling notes on a scrap of paper he'd found in his backpack. By the time dawn began to break, casting soft light over the city, Elon felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had come into this experiment seeking answers, and now he had a plan, a starting point. But more importantly, he had something he hadn't expected, an ally in Darius, whose passion and wisdom would prove invaluable in the journey ahead. For the first time, Elon began to see the path forward, not just as a billionaire with resources to spare, but as a human being with the capacity to care. A week after his experience on the streets, Elon Musk stood on the stage of the same grand ballroom where the charity gala had been held. The room was once again filled with Los Angeles elite, CEOs, celebrities, and philanthropists who had come expecting another polished evening of speeches and silent auctions. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. Whispers rippled through the crowd as Elon took the stage. His name had been conspicuously absent from the evening's program, and no one quite knew what to expect. Elon's usual confident demeanor was tempered by something softer, something vulnerable. Dressed simply in a gray blazer and jeans, he stepped up to the microphone, gripping the edges of the podium. "Good evening," he began, his voice calm but firm. "I wasn't originally scheduled to speak tonight, but I felt compelled to share something important with all of you." The room grew quiet, the audience leaning in with curiosity. Many of you know me as a tech entrepreneur, someone who's dedicated his life to solving big, complex problems. But over the past week, I've come to realize just how much I've overlooked the problems closest to home, issues like homelessness, poverty, and systemic inequality. Elon paused, scanning the room. He could see the mixture of intrigue and skepticism on the faces before him. "A few days ago, I decided to step out of my world and into the world of those we claim to be helping," he continued. "I lived on the streets, disguised as a homeless man, and what I saw changed me." Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of disbelief. Elon raised a hand to quiet them. "I saw people ignored, dehumanized, treated as less than. I saw racial disparities that were impossible to ignore, how Black and brown individuals are disproportionately affected by homelessness, and how they're treated differently even when they're at their most vulnerable. I experienced it firsthand, and it was humbling, to say the least." Elon gestured toward a large screen behind him. "But tonight isn't just about my story, it's about what we can do to make a difference. Not with grand gestures or temporary fixes, but with systemic change." The screen lit up with a series of images: a rundown shelter filled to capacity, a line of tents stretching along a freeway overpass, a protest demanding affordable housing. "These are the realities we often ignore," Elon said, "but ignoring them won't make them go away. If we're serious about ending homelessness, we need to address the root causes: the lack of affordable housing, racial inequities in wealth and opportunity, and the criminalization of poverty." The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the feel-good charity speech they had expected. Elon pressed on. "I'm pledging $100 million to a new initiative aimed at tackling these root causes. But this isn't just about money. I'm partnering with grassroots organizations, like the one led by Darius Freeman, a social worker who has dedicated his life to fighting for those the system leaves behind." At the mention of his name, Darius stood from a table near the back of the room. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo like the other guests, just his usual button-down shirt and jeans. A spotlight found him, and the audience turned to look. "Darius has been my guide in this journey," Elon continued, his voice filled with admiration. "He's shown me what real advocacy looks like, and I want to use my platform to amplify voices like his. Voices that are often overlooked but carry the wisdom we desperately need." Elon's tone softened as he addressed the crowd directly. "I know many of you came here tonight expecting another gala, a chance to network, to write a check, to feel good about giving back. But I'm asking for something more. I'm asking you to use your influence, your resources, and your power to create lasting change." He stepped away from the podium, his final words ringing out across the room. "Charity alone won't solve this. We need justice, and justice begins with action." The room erupted in applause, though not everyone clapped with the same enthusiasm. Some guests seemed moved, their expressions thoughtful. Others looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. As Elon left the stage, he joined Darius at his table. The younger man gave him a nod of approval. "That was powerful," Darius said. "I hope it's enough," Elon replied, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Darius smiled faintly. "It's a start." That night, the media exploded with coverage of Elon's speech. Some praised him for using his platform to highlight systemic issues, while others criticized his approach as performative. But Elon didn't care about the headlines. His focus was on the work ahead, on turning promises into action. As the guests filtered out of the ballroom, many of them lingered to speak with Darius. For the first time, the conversation wasn't about photo ops or publicity, it was about solutions. And in the days that followed, Elon's initiative began to take shape. Funding flowed into affordable housing projects, lobbying efforts targeted discriminatory policies, and grassroots organizations received the support they had long been denied. For Elon, the reveal wasn't just about shedding light on the issue. It was about illuminating the path forward. And though the journey was far from over, he knew he was finally headed in the right direction. The experiment had changed him, but more importantly, it had sparked a change in others. The question now was how far that change could go. In the months following Elon Musk's bold reveal at the charity gala, the world began to take notice. The $100 million initiative he launched in partnership with Darius Freeman became more than just another philanthropic project. It became a movement. The initiative, named Reclaim Hope, focused on three core pillars: affordable housing, systemic reform, and empowering grassroots organizations. Unlike traditional charity efforts, it wasn't about temporary solutions or band-aids. It sought to address the structural inequalities that fueled homelessness, poverty, and racial disparities. For Darius, the work was grueling but invigorating. Meetings with policymakers, community leaders, and corporate sponsors filled his days. He often found himself standing in rooms he had never imagined he'd enter, explaining the realities of homelessness and systemic racism to people who had previously seen the issue as abstract. "You can't fix a system you don't understand," he told a group of corporate executives during one meeting. "Listen to the people who live it every day. They know the solutions better than anyone else." Elon, true to his word, took a backseat when necessary. He let Darius and other grassroots leaders drive the conversation, using his wealth and influence to amplify their voices rather than overshadow them. The first major victory came 3 months later, a groundbreaking affordable housing project in South Los Angeles. Unlike many developments, this one was designed in collaboration with the community it would serve. Darius worked closely with architects and residents to ensure the buildings were not just functional, but dignified, places where families could thrive, not just survive. On the day of the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Elon and Darius stood side by side, watching as the first families moved into their new homes. The sight of children running through the hallways, their laughter echoing against freshly painted walls, brought a rare smile to Elon's face. "This is just the beginning," Darius said, his voice filled with determination. Elon nodded. "It has to be." But the journey wasn't without challenges. Critics were quick to pounce, accusing Elon of using the initiative as a PR stunt or questioning whether the efforts could truly scale. Others resisted the systemic reforms the initiative championed, particularly when it came to addressing racial inequities in housing and wages. During a heated debate with a group of city officials, Darius didn't mince words. "You can't separate homelessness from race," he said, his tone unwavering. "The numbers don't lie. Black and brown communities are bearing the brunt of this crisis because of decades, centuries of discriminatory policies. If you're not willing to confront that, then you're not serious about solving this." Elon, sitting silently at the back of the room, felt a surge of admiration. Darius had become the heart of Reclaim Hope, a voice for those who had been silenced for far too long. As the initiative gained momentum, it began to inspire others. Tech companies, long criticized for their role in driving up housing costs, started to contribute to the cause. Several CEOs reached out to Elon, asking how they could replicate the model in their own cities. Celebrities who had attended the original gala became active participants, using their platforms to raise awareness and drive donations. Even ordinary citizens got involved, volunteering at shelters, attending protests, and pushing for policy changes in their communities. One of the most powerful moments came during a town hall meeting in Oakland. A middle-aged Black woman stood up, tears streaming down her face as she shared her story. "For years, I felt invisible," she said, her voice trembling. "But because of this initiative, my kids have a home, a real home. And for the first time, I believe we have a future." Her words echoed in Elon's mind long after the meeting ended. They reminded him why this work mattered, not just as a billionaire seeking redemption, but as a human being with a responsibility to make the world better. A year later, Reclaim Hope had become a national model for tackling homelessness and systemic inequality. Policies inspired by the initiative were passed in several major cities, and partnerships with local governments ensured that the work was sustainable. Elon's personal transformation was equally profound. His time on the streets had given him a perspective he could never have gained from boardrooms or spreadsheets. It wasn't just about solving problems anymore. It was about understanding people. Darius, now a nationally recognized advocate, often teased Elon about his newfound humility. "You've come a long way, Musk," he said with a grin during one of their many late-night brainstorming sessions. "And I've got a long way to go," Elon replied, his tone serious. "But I'm in it for the long haul." By the second anniversary of Reclaim Hope, homelessness in Los Angeles had decreased by 15%. It wasn't a miracle cure. It never could be. But it was progress. More importantly, it was a blueprint for how society could change when resources and compassion worked hand in hand. At a celebration event for the initiative, Elon took the stage once again, this time joined by Darius. "This isn't my legacy," Elon said, gesturing to the crowd. "It's ours. It belongs to the people who fought for change long before I showed up, and to the people who will keep fighting long after I'm gone." The audience erupted in applause, but Elon's gaze remained steady, focused on the faces of those who had inspired him to take this journey in the first place. In the end, the experiment that had begun as a quest for understanding had grown into something far greater, a movement rooted in justice, humanity, and hope. And for Elon Musk, it was proof that even the most complex problems could be solved, not with technology alone, but with empathy and a willingness to confront the uncomfortable truths of the world. As the celebration continued, Darius leaned over and whispered, "Think you'll ever go back to sleeping on the streets?" Elon chuckled softly. "Only if I need another wake-up call." They both laughed. The weight of their shared journey lightened, if only for a moment. Thank you so much for watching this story. Your support means everything to us. If you enjoyed it and want to see more inspiring stories like this, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear from you. What time are you watching this video, and where are you tuning in from? Drop a comment below and let us know. It's always amazing to see how far our community reaches. And remember, every share, like, or comment helps us spread these powerful stories to more people. Thanks for being part of this journey, and we'll see you in the next one.